Hello and welcome. My name is Carol Carter. I'm with GlobalMindED. I'm here with Celeste Gardner and Lisa Wyckoff and Kirsten, our team from GlobalMindED. We are doing our 2020 event this year virtually because of COVID-19. And if you're not familiar with GlobalMindED, we're about creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented, and first generation to graduate high school and college students into the education, economic mobility, employment, and leadership pipeline. So we do that in a number of different ways. And one of those ways is we have this annual event every year. And we will be we're launching it this week, and we run through June 15th. And then we'll be doing some special events with one of the people actually attending today, JC Wharton. We're going to be having a special event on rural populations, and that'll be happening throughout the entire week, one of the weeks in July. So we'll have that posted in our newsletter to let you know when that will be. So the rest of this week, we have several other featured sessions on higher education. Later today, we have an event on higher education and Latino leadership. And then we have one tomorrow with Ascendium Education and many of their experts on prison pipeline and education and professional opportunities. And then in the afternoon, we have several college presidents, and we're looking at the post-pandemic models for higher education. So we've had a lot of other events this week. They're all posted on our YouTube channel. This event today will also be on the YouTube channel, and we are delighted that you're able to join us. So with that, I'll introduce Jean Vanderhoop, and he's the organizational performance expert at JobTimize and does incredible work with a lot of the populations that we serve. I'll have him speak more specifically, but Native populations, populations in prison, all kinds of access and equity issues, and he's very dedicated to this with the work that he does. So welcome, John. We're so glad that you're here and looking forward to your session.
Carol, thanks. I tell you, I'm really glad to be here, and I feel a bit like an imposter because I'm really very much a newcomer to this space. We sort of backed our way into it through a series of conversations. But now that I think about it, that sort of is the way my life has unfolded. It's tended to be a series of accidents and chance encounters that sort of led to something really interesting. So by introduction, you know, I spent 15 years of my life in corporate and decided that I was tired of being a misfit, but I was able to do really well and do good work in the corporate world, but there were lots of things for me at the time that I felt I was masking. I was pretending to be somebody I really wasn't in order to be successful and in order to get things done. And so made the decision to leave the corporate world about 20 years ago and started consulting. Found myself in a space where I was doing work with organizations really at the intersection between people and performance, and working with organizations to fix organizational systems that weren't functioning in a way that was really good for the human element, if you like, and was causing friction in the organization. And a similar, you know, chance encounter led to us starting this business 15 years ago. And so even though the title for the session is a little whimsical, there's some very serious questions behind it, and I'm going to sort of lead you through the logic that got us here. But fundamentally, you know, what transitioned me into this latest incarnation 15 years ago was the realization that in organizations, there are lots of really good people who are not in jobs that they're really terribly well suited to. So they're being asked to draw from things that aren't naturally their strengths and being asked to pretend to be somebody they're not. And that causes all sorts of pain and friction for the organization as well as for the people. And underneath that was the realization that even though there's a lot of hiring that goes on in organizations, there really isn't a lot of really good hiring that goes on. And so it was looking at that really had us take a step back and say, all right, what do we need to attack here to understand and then address the problem? And what would be the solution? And so, you know, the tagline, if you like, the follow-on to the title for the session, I think the conclusion I'd like to draw us to is if we learn to measure what matters most, and applied it to the work that we're doing collectively. And this isn't just me with our clients, but I think it applies to everyone who's in the workforce ecosystem, so to speak. So that would, that means educators, that means employers, it means agencies, it means people, individuals. If we learn to speak the same language and measure what matters most, we might just have a workforce system, a workforce ecosystem that works for everybody. And until very recently, when we started into these conversations with Carol and JC and others about a year ago, it really hadn't occurred to us how widespread the dissatisfaction was with the way things are working today. We knew that organizations weren't happy with the results they were seeing. We knew that lots of people weren't satisfied with the way things were going for them. But the further we got into the conversation, the more we've realized that the dissatisfaction is pretty much unanimous. And so when we started up this path 15 years ago, we started with a really simple question, which was to look at how efficiently organizations were matching talent with opportunity. And that's either taking people who are already in the organization and then doing career and succession planning with them, or it could be hiring people in from outside the organization. And the only way to get an answer to that question is to look at the outcomes or the results. And so we looked at the research that was in the marketplace at the time, the numbers that were being reported, and frankly, these statistics haven't changed much over the years. I mean, when you look at the results of hiring in most organizations, the level of confidence that job seekers or applicants have that the process is going to actually yield them the job that they're well suited to and that they're going to perform well in is pretty low. So 70% of job seekers are dissatisfied with the process. Almost 30% of managers don't have confidence that the process is going to yield them the right person. And that kicks off a whole series, a whole avalanche, if you like, of decisions and behaviors that that compound. Because if the employee isn't fully committed, they're going to hold back. If the manager is not fully committed to the employee, they're going to hold back and not give them all of the training and support and tools they need to be successful. And that results in a whole series of other symptoms that we see in terms of turnover rates, in terms of attendance rates, in terms of productivity rates, in terms of waste in organizations. And so that very first stat, the lack of confidence in the system, does create a cascade. The second stat, around buyer's remorse, 50% of managers and 50% of new hires are asking themselves after the first month whether this was really the right decision. And I'll skip forward for the sake of the conversation, but this is a slide that gets a lot of attention when I'm presenting to business leaders. The bottom statistic relates to a survey that was done by Leadership IQ, where they surveyed people who were hired and the managers who hired them after 90 days. And asked them both, to what extent was this a really great decision for you? And 1 time in 5, both the manager and the person who was hired had their thumbs up, saying, yes, this was a really great decision. So when I'm in conversation with CEOs or with CFOs, the follow-up question that really makes them uneasy is, where else in your business operations would you tolerate an 80% failure rate? And of course, the answer is, there isn't any other area where they would tolerate it. But the truth is, they don't recognize the extent of the problem because it doesn't show up anywhere on a P&L, right? None of these statistics are reported as a line item with a dollar sign behind them. And so it's easy to just look the other way and allow the friction and inefficiency to carry on. Another symptom of this mismatching, this poor matching that's taking place is from work that Gallup did starting 20 years ago when they tripped across this thing called engagement. Statistically, 30% of the workforce, less than 30% of the workforce, in most cases it's in the sort of low 20s, are fully engaged in their work, meaning fully committed to helping the organization achieve its objectives, which means that there's somewhere in the order of 70% or more of the workforce that's at least partially or fully disengaged. Gallup's math suggests that equates to 23% of payroll dollars going to waste. So they're spending out the money on payroll, but not getting the return on investment that the company deserves or that they should be getting if people were more fully committed to meeting their objectives. Which in any organization, payroll is after cost of goods, payroll is the biggest expense. And so, for any organization, that's a sizable nut to try to work out. A little bit more unsettling is the realization that a vast majority of senior HR professionals would tell you straight up, we don't think we have the right people to achieve our business objectives. And more importantly, sorry, that one's on a timer, I guess. And more importantly, they don't know how to fix the problem. And so that for us, when we tripped across it at the start, really pointed to something that was a gaping problem that needed to be fixed. And now, of course, we look at what's happening in the world around us, and everything that we're experiencing with the pandemic right now is bringing all of the inefficiencies, all of the weaknesses in our infrastructure, all of the things that we were able to skate by when things were relatively normal front and center. And we're all finding ourselves, I would say, coming face to face with challenges and inefficiencies that are coming back to bite us. I mean, we've now got, between Canada and the United States, probably more now than 40 million people on the sidelines. The reality is the majority of, well, I won't say the majority, but a sizable proportion of those jobs are not going to come back. Or if they do come back, they're going to be in fewer in number, and they're not going to be the same jobs that people left, because they will have been automated or in some way changed in a fundamental way that's going to require people with other training and skill sets to come in and do those jobs if we're not equipped to train up and upskill the people who left those jobs. I've been reading a number of reports, and I'm sure you have too, over the last few weeks, saying that this whole experience that we're living through with COVID has probably accelerated the whole future of work conversation by at least 3 years. So we've known that there's this risk out there, in quotation marks, that sizable proportions of the workforce are going to get automated, or in some way their jobs are going to change fundamentally, and we've got to reskill people to prepare for those jobs. What these, who comes up with these numbers about accelerated by 3 years, I don't know, but I think the reality is that future is a lot closer than we ever realized it was, which means for all of us, I think, much as, we were talking before this presentation started about how confusing these times are and how swirly these times are and unsettling. And I think the reality is every one of us individually and every one of us collectively are trying to make sense of what we're seeing and trying to stay ahead of trends and patterns so that we can be relevant and make be the change that we want to see. The reality is every one of us is going to be facing reinvention. And I think, much as there's a lot of risk at this point in time, I really think that there's a lot of opportunity as well for us to sort of envision the situation that we're in and look at it through the eyes of opportunity rather than risk. And so, we're finding ourselves in conversation at the policy level with a number of governments, jurisdictions, some of them local, some of them provincial or state level, where, from a workforce standpoint, from an investment in training and education, from an investment in skills and apprenticeships, there's an awful lot of openness now, I think, to new policies, new ideas, new approaches, new systems that didn't exist 2 short months ago. So that's where I think we see some tremendous opportunity. And not only is there a receptivity to those ideas, people now find they've got time to entertain those ideas, which didn't happen before this happened. And all of a sudden, they're finding funding to make some of these ideas happen, which is the best part. So we're sort of finding that trifecta of time, openness, and budget dollars that I think has the ability to really make some very big changes to the economy and how things operate. Employers, for sure, are thinking about a lot of things, starting from their fundamental business model, right? They're looking at how they've done business in the past, how they've served customers, how they've delivered their product, and they're reconceiving how they need to deliver their products and services in the future. And the smart ones are doing it from the ground up and really thinking through, okay, if we're going to be delivering our business in a certain way that's fundamentally different from in the past, we also need to clean sheet what our organization chart looks like. We need to clean sheet what skills and experiences and people we need in our organization to deliver what the market needs today. And that's part of the disruption that we're going to see on the workforce side of things. Educators. I mean, again, this is your space, not mine. But you know, I've been amazed and in awe of the scrambling that has taken place in education over the last several months as organizations have moved online, as they've moved virtual, as they're finding new and better ways to deliver their curriculum. I think we're going to see more of that as we move forward. And fundamentally, you know, back to the individual, which is where I really want to focus the conversation for a while today. People, whether they're on the sideline or not, I really think we need to be asking ourselves a very different question. And for most, it's, you know, the question is, especially if they're unemployed right now, how do I find a job? And there's some urgency to that. I understand it. But I think you know, as we sometimes say, we need to get away from our linear way of thinking about how do I find my next job? Because when you think about how we started our careers, every one of us, you know, or even made our choices, I can tell you that for myself and for everyone I know, you know, my decision around my academic pathway at university was haphazard at best. I narrowed it down to a couple of choices. One was hospitality, one was engineering. You couldn't think two things, you know, much different in the spectrum. Ended up choosing hospitality because everybody told me I should do it. So I was guided there by my parents, by my teachers, by Uncle Bob, and found that the program pretty much agreed with me. The first job I landed in was convenient. I won't call it random, but it was convenient. And I think that's the case for most of us. And from there, things sort of unfold. And so when we find ourselves at a crossroads, there's urgency to find my next job. And for most of us, whether we're doing it alone or whether we're working with a career advisor or a counselor, the approach is always built on, what have I done up until now? What's my education? What are my skills? Who's in my network? What jobs have I had up until now? And what's the logical option from here moving forward? And when you approach it from that perspective, the range of options is always really narrow. It's always narrow, it's always flat, and it's always somehow related to everything I've done up until now, which doesn't frankly hold a lot of possibility. And so I think particularly in the times that we're facing today, the more valuable question for every one of us, whether we're currently employed or whether we're on the sidelines, is, you know, what else am I really well suited to that might be completely removed from everything that I've done up until now? Not saying ignore my skills and ignore my network and my knowledge and those assets that I built up over time, but I think there's value to somehow suspending that just long enough to really entertain the question of, what other types of roles would I be really well suited to? What other kind of work am I really compatible with? And so this brings me back a little bit to the whimsical title for the session, which is, you know, what would happen if LinkedIn and eHarmony had a baby? And so let's talk about those two platforms for just a second, because they're both online, they're both software as a service, but they both approach similar questions from very different perspectives, right? So LinkedIn, and I'm sure everybody here knows, but it's, you know, fundamentally about three things: building networks, it's about expanding your social network, and it's about really being a job board. For most of us, when we build our profile online, it amounts to an online resume. So for a lot of us, it's a place where I put the stuff that I've done before and the stuff that I've known and the credentials and certificates and other things that I've acquired over time into a place where it can be merchandised to the public for people to learn about me. And eHarmony's similar, but built very differently, because it starts by getting to know you as a person. You know, I remember when years ago when we were doing some basic research into one of the platforms that we've been developing, we went into eHarmony, and it was really cool. I mean, they were asking, you had to answer a minimum set of questions before they could start to help you. But they kept it to the minimum because they knew that they wanted people to complete their profile and not get bored and go away. But lots of opportunity to go in and answer more questions. They prompt you to answer more questions. So the whole system is geared to eHarmony getting to know you so that they can suggest good matches. So there's some kind of behavioral thing going on in the background that says, if you are this way, then these are some people that we think you'd be compatible with. And it is all about leading with compatibility. And what occurred to us at the time is, you know, work is really just another relationship or a cluster of relationships. Because when I go to work, I have a relationship with my manager. I've got a relationship with my coworkers. I've got a relationship with my customers. I've got a relationship and a sense of identity with the work that I'm doing. I've got a level of relationship with the organization and its culture and its values and the things we do here. And so, I think as we look at the two, both are important and both are valuable. And I think they each share a clue as to what might be missing in the process of matching talent with opportunity. And so let me take that leap with you for just a moment, because we tripped across some research a number of years ago. And these numbers haven't changed much over the years. So what's really cool about this research is they repeat it on a regular basis to make sure that they're still current. And what they're looking at here is the researchers listed down the left-hand side all of the bits of information that an employer would collect about somebody they're considering for employment. So, you know, it starts with education, training, and previous experience. That's sort of the resume stuff. As people work further through the process, you know, the employer collects additional bits of information about them. The numbers you see down the center of the slide are the predictive value of each of those items. So to what extent does this bit of information provide something that is reliably predictive of the person's success in the job? And the thing that you notice right off the bat is the items in the purple box are the things that are in the resume, or the things that are in my LinkedIn profile. And yet in organizations, and I was guilty of it when I was in the corporate world, because it was just the way things are done. When an organization places an ad online and say, or back in the classifieds when I started, you know, what's the first thing they ask for? They ask for the resume. And so in the old days, we used to get paper. Nowadays, it comes electronically. But the task that we were given in HR was to sort of play Ouija with this stack of resumes and look for the right combination of keywords and phrases and education and what have you, so that we could shorten the stack to something more manageable, without realizing that all of those things that we were relying on to shorten the stack had really weak predictive value of success. So we were tossing people off the island for the wrong reasons, right? And so, you know, when you look at the other numbers, you know, far more reliable are who the person is, based on their behavioral traits, based on who they are deep down inside, which is, by the way, the stuff that eHarmony leads with, right? And so the question that we entertained 3 years ago was, so what if we flip this thing on its head? What if we could design a system that would actually lead with who the person is, and then allow the organization, the client of ours, to screen the right people rather than the right resumes. So instead of directing them to the right substack of resumes, let's guide them to the right people in the pool, and then filter them for the necessary skills, knowledge, and experience. And what we found was, it actually worked really well. The clients were screening in people, and after a period of time, there's always this point with an organization where they'll sit back and they'll say, you know, we've been hiring some really great people for our business. They're a great fit. And because they're a great fit, they onboard faster, they're productive faster, they stay longer, there's less friction with coworkers, there's, you know, our customers are happier. Whatever the symptoms are, things are just running smoother in the organization. But they'll say, you know, honestly, a lot of these people we hired were such a great fit, we'd have never looked at in a million years based on their resume. And what that highlighted for us is, not only the dumb rules that we made up years ago, because we had to find some rules that were going to help us shorten the stack of resumes, but what also came clear for us is the extent to which any process that begins with the resume perpetuates barriers and perpetuates disadvantages for anybody who's from a segment of the population that isn't mainstream. And so as we've been refining our technologies around, fit first, behavior first versus resume first, we've had amazing opportunities to work, as Carol, you said in the introduction, with organizations and segments of the population who are not mainstream, who don't have a resume that has any hope of having the right keywords and phrases in it, truthfully. Right? So, working with veterans, working with people with disabilities, people on the autism spectrum, at-risk women and youth, the returning citizen population. What we found is when you can build a system that's actually going to lead with who the person is, rather than what they know and where they've been up until now, it opens up a whole slew of possibilities that weren't there before. So when you put these two concepts together, when you put together the full picture now of the person's resume, the collection of what they've acquired and what they know with who they are as an individual, all of a sudden now you've got the ability to put together something really cool and very powerful. And so in just about a year ago, so I think we're just crossing over Jobtimize's first birthday, what we built was a platform that's really designed for three stakeholders. The first is employers, and that's been our meat and potatoes for the last 15 years. So of course we're going to include them, but it's a space where employers can post their open positions. And the behavioral job matching algorithms are going to be screening everybody who applies for their open positions for fit or compatibility in those jobs that the employers have posted. For individuals, whether they're job seekers or students or anybody who's just trying to find their way, trying to find the constellation rather than this linear path forward. We've always described it as almost what you'd expect to see if LinkedIn and eHarmony had a baby. So somebody can go on, they can create their profile, they go through the behavioral questionnaire, they go through their interests and other bits of information, and the more the system learns about the person, the more intelligent, the better qualified the occupational or educational suggestions the system's going to make for them. And we also built a space for this third group, which is anybody who's an intermediary. So, we've got some really interesting examples of people who are in that space right now. I mean, workforce development's a no-brainer, but we've also got a community college district in Texas that's been using Jobtimize for close to a year. They were one of our very first clients using it for academic advising and now for connecting their students to local employers. And so there are tools there for anybody who's in that intermediate job matching space. And the shift for everyone, the shift that really powers all of this is that the match suggestion is done on compatibility first, and then it's filtered for knowledge, skills, experience by the employer, or filtered for the skills I've already got and the interests that I have as the job seeker. But the foundation is on behavioral compatibility first and foremost. So for individuals, this is really now about, if you think back to the picture of the constellation, they've got the tools to start to rethink what might be next for them based on who I am as an individual and what my full potential is, rather than being limited purely by what I know up until now and what I've done so far. So, some of these, when anybody goes into Jobtimize, just by nature, because we're projecting them into the full ONET occupational library, which is what, 1,250 or so occupations. There's going to be some jobs that frankly they're not interested in, which is great. There's going to be other jobs that are way too aspirational for them based on their interests, their education, and what they believe they're going to be able to achieve. And there's other jobs that are going to be either completely transferable or slightly aspirational, where they're going to require a building block, a credential, some skills, some education, some knowledge. And the objective here is to make it easy for them to identify what the building block of skills or knowledge would be so that they can acquire that, which is where I think there's a really interesting connection point with this community, and then go out and be fully qualified to apply for the position that they already know they're a really strong fit for. Interestingly enough, employers also have the ability to see them through the lens of who I am as an individual and what my potential is, rather than being blinded by the label of veteran, disabled, autistic, whatever. And so it really does level the playing field. Just really quickly, how we measure the individual. The science that we lean into here isn't new science. It's based on the Big Five model of behavioral science. It's probably 25, 30 years old. It is by far and away the most thoroughly researched piece of science, particularly as it relates to job matching. And what we've done is we've taken the Big Five traits, which are the ones in bold on the slide here, and we've teased out an additional 20 much finer expressions, if you like, or distinctions. So this is the eHarmony part of what we've built. And so we've got a total of 25 traits that fall loosely into the 5 categories you see there. So who am I as a person? How am I likely to get along with others? How am I likely to approach my work? How do I deal with change? How do I deal with adversity? And so for an individual now who goes through the process, they get very detailed information about what it is that makes them unique and what their signature strengths are. So there's going to be a certain number of traits where the individual scores differently than most people. And this is a screenshot, so it's not interactive the way it would be if you were online. But as soon as the individual completes their assessment, they get a full report back that says, all right, here's you across the 25 traits. The bubbles that are in bold are the traits that we would call your signature traits, the ones that most define you based on how you answered the questions. And they're the things that make you different from most people. So these are the traits that are going to have the strongest bearing on your relationships, on the kinds of jobs you're likely to be most compatible with. They're also the things that people are likely to see in you as unique and admire if you're able to applying them as strengths. They can sometimes be the things that cause friction points. But fundamentally, the first level, if you like, the first layer of learning for somebody going through this process is they get a level of self-awareness that they probably didn't have previously. And it's been fascinating as we've been doing the work in the veteran space, for example, over the last 3 years. Every one of them will say, this is a completely accurate snapshot of who I am today. It's not who I was when I enlisted or when I shipped out. And the conversation with them is, we know that, when someone goes through trauma, significant trauma, their behavioral thumbprint is going to change somewhat. And so, it's always an interesting conversation with them, but there's an appreciation for having this information as somebody, or as something that they can take home and share around the kitchen table with their family members and their loved ones to say, look, if you've been saying I'm different, I agree I'm different, never been able to put my finger on it or express who I am today, let's talk about this, and let's as a family go through and get our own results so we can talk around the kitchen table about how we're alike and how we're different, and how those differences sometimes manifest in friction or tension in the household. And so just really cool to see how some of these conversations have evolved. The next layer of learning, if you like, for the individual is beginning to connect the dots between who they are and the kinds of jobs they're really compatible with. And so the system's got toggles in it, got filters in it, so that the person can set their educational level, they can set the desired level of income. And what the system's going to do is take their patterns across the 25 traits that we measured and project them into the entire occupational library and identify their best picks. And each one of these drops down. So if you were to choose park naturalist, for example, what the program is designed to do is show you why you're an especially good fit or not an especially good fit for a specific job. So what you see on the left-hand side of the screen here is the traits that are most critical to success in the park naturalist job, and where Sam Sample, I guess this guy's name is, scores in relation to the sweet spot for that trait. So again, lots of discovery here for the individual to begin to understand why this might be a good relationship and why other relationships, other jobs that they've been interested in might be good relationships also, or might be something they're going to have to pretend to be somebody they're not in order to survive. And so there's also a career planning report available in the system. Currently, we split it into 2 lists. So the first list would be jobs that generally require post-secondary education, and the occupations are linked to ONET. So if somebody's interested in researching a career and getting a little bit more information about it, we've made it easy for them to do that. And the second list is a set of roles that typically are more vocational in nature, that don't require the same level of investment, if you like, in formal education. So again, I started this session talking about how the conversations that we've found ourselves in over the last year have been really fascinating. And this slide actually came out of a conversation that we had in Las Vegas. And I don't want to go through the full detail of the slide, but it really is about how taking an eHarmony approach as a starting point can enable a very different conversation in a workforce ecosystem. So this came out of a presentation we made to a group of local employers and economic development folks and workforce development folks that have been put together by the PBS station in Las Vegas. And we got partway into the presentation where we were talking just about those 2 circles in the center, as I did with you just a moment ago. And suddenly there was a lot of sort of elbowing and whispering in the back of the room. So we stopped the presentation to ask them what was going on. And unbeknownst to us, CVS Pharmacies had just made the announcement the week previous that they were dropping a 500-seat call center into Las Vegas. And so the economic development folks were really excited. And the party ended quickly when CVS said to the ECDev folks, so how can you help us fill these seats? And this was a year ago. The economy was booming. Things were normal. And ECDev really didn't have a suitable answer to the question. And so what got the elbows going and the whispers going at the back of the room was, it was actually one of the executives from CVS and one of the ECDev folks going back and forth. And when I stopped them to ask what was going on, it was the CVS executive who stood up and said, so do you mean to tell me that if we'd had a system like this in place, or if Vegas had had a system like this in place a year ago, we'd be able to go to our partners in economic development and say, all right, give us a list of everybody who's within a 25-mile radius of where the call center's going, who've got previous call center experience and or a really high fit score for that position? And the answer was, of course. And then they said, so could we then do a second list of people who are strong fit, live in that 25-mile radius, but maybe have never worked in a call center before? And could we put a lasso around that group of people and bring them over to our community college partners and say, all right, you folks in education, can you put together a program that's going to prepare these folks for the jobs that are coming when we open the call center? And then could we further reach this? They made the presentation for me. It was just amazing to see how the conversation unfolded. But they said, could we then reach into post-secondary? Could we reach into K-12 to understand what the talent pipeline might look like? And could we use that as a way to start thinking about how we might engage people earlier, even on a part-time basis, and invest in building a relationship with them that can see them, coming to work for us for some period of time. So for me, it was a wonderful conversation to have. The only reason I'm presenting it in the context of this presentation is I think there's sort of a street level view of what's possible, but there's also an ecosystem level view that absolutely engages and involves educators and policymakers and everybody who is engaged in trying to prepare the right people for the right roles just in time. And that, I think, has been one of the biggest challenges that we've faced for a very, very long time. So, it's been a year or so, and we've got a couple of stories to tell about how taking a FitFirst approach to work-based learning has made a difference. And so this particular example is our very first client using the JobTimize platform. They're an association that supports electrical contractors. They had received some grant money to sort of re-engineer the approach to apprenticeship. It hadn't changed in a very long time, and it was suffering from low levels of enrollment. So demographics were not in the favor of the trade. People were retiring from it much faster than people were coming in. They weren't attracting apprentices into the apprenticeship, and those they were attracting in were falling out at an alarming rate. So, you know, you'd have 100 people go in and you'd have 30 graduate. The secondary objective they had was they needed to, in order to qualify for the grant money, they had to have some objectives around diversifying the trade. And so they had some objectives around bringing in more women, more visible minorities, more newcomers, more people with disabilities, and more Indigenous. And so we got them up and running. The system was geared to screen in people who were likelier to have the tenacity to make it through the 5 years of the apprenticeship, and also you know, be happy and productive in one of the jobs waiting for them at the end of the process. And 8 months in, they sat down with us and said, holy cow, you know, we've sort of overachieved here. They were running almost 200% of their hiring objective. And even though they knew that they were going to have to do some outreach into those targeted communities to try to promote the trades, they hadn't gotten around to doing any of that proactive outreach yet. And in spite of that, fully 24% of the people they hired into the electrical apprenticeship openings they had were self-declared from at least one of those 5 segments that that they were targeting. And so, you know, the conversation with Stephen Sell, who is the president of the Electrical League, said, you know, one of the things that we've learned here is when you keep people out of the very first step of the screening process just long enough to allow the algorithms to identify for you the candidates in the pool who will have the highest level of compatibility with the open position, diversity is a natural outcome of that. That, you know, the algorithms, the behavioral matching algorithms are blind to any labels we might attach to the individual, and so you know, diversity is an outcome. It just happens, and the approach eliminates barriers. Similar story is with a halfway house that we've been working with for a while. You know, they've been using the FitFirst, the behavioral approach, to match the right vocational training to the right individual, to match the individual to the right employers, and also to help the employer focus first on the behavioral fit and what's possible, rather than, you know, what other baggage the person might take or be carrying with them. And we're pleased to report that, you know, for the first time in their history, they're placing 100% of their clients in real jobs that have promise. And it's still too early to do the longitudinal report, but you know, the level of confidence in the matches and the quality of jobs that they're finding in their placements has given them an awful lot of confidence. So that's sort of my content. I know we're targeting 50 minutes, which leaves us some time for questions, and I'd certainly like to open the floor up to questions. I'm going to add a couple of other things into the conversation pot if I can. One is these last two are sort of related. You know, we've made the decision with everything that's going on with COVID that we really want to make Jobtimize available free of charge to anyone who's found themselves on the sidelines. So free to individuals who are unemployed or out of you know, out of work or out of education, as a tool to help them find their way forward. I'm also looking for connections and relationships with educational institutions or organizations that can provide building blocks of skills, knowledge, and experience to people, so that when they look at their constellation, if there's a knowledge gap between where they are and where they'd like to be, we can make relevant referrals to those building blocks of education. So that's probably a bigger conversation than we can get into in the next 5 or 10 minutes. But if there's anybody on the call who's got ideas or suggestions around some of those connections, particularly for online programs, I'd be delighted to find myself in a conversation with you. So there you go. I'm going to shut up, and Carol, Celeste, who's going to moderate the questions here?
Yeah, we can take questions, and it's a small enough group if somebody wants to unmute themselves and ask, or they can put a question in the chat. And I just mentioned as well, Jean, that I think we could look at this for these global-minded collaborative locations. So we'll catch up on how we can do that, but I think that it'd be great to have that. And I think a lot of things are going to be, have to be virtual in the fall at the rate we're going, without a vaccine on the horizon. So
I agree.
But yeah, whoever has questions. Gail, good to see you. Anyone have any questions for Jean? I'll just say, I think this is such an important piece for students, that the whole area of self-awareness is so underemphasized in high school, in college, and you can't make good decisions. You can have a million pathway programs, you can have this, that, and the next thing, but if you don't know who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses, what kinds of things you're interested in, these are such basic building blocks of what makes you a good fit for something. Right. So I just think, this is really, really important work. So,
well, and there are lots of things I can think my way through, but they're not my bliss, right? So, so I can pretend to be somebody I'm not for a while in order to get something done, or I can draw from something that I'm naturally good at, but doesn't feed my soul. Like looking at spreadsheets, right? I'm one of these guys that can look at a spreadsheet and see the anomaly off the bat. But if I had to spend more than 5 minutes a day looking at spreadsheets, I'd be sticking pencils in my eye.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes with people, career changing, I had 17 years, in corporate America. And then just because I could do some of the next things didn't mean that at that stage I wanted to do some of those things.
Or
so
should have been. Right.
You have different things change at different times. People who are parents, people who, have different needs that are personal that weigh into this, as well as the interest areas.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So
Any other questions for Jean that you all have? Okay, Lori has one. As she said, excellent information. I found myself agreeing with what you've been saying.
Oh, that's a relief.
Awesome. Yes. Well, and we're just all delighted that you all came. We know this is a very busy time for people, and a lot of you are juggling, kids at home and multiple ways that everyone's really having to pivot right now. So we're just delighted, and we really support, John's work and value his partnership. We have some global-minded collaboratives at 15 colleges. Several of them are historically Black colleges. Some of them are minority-serving institutions. Some of them are Hispanic-serving institutions. And I think it would be great, because they're all under-resourced, if we could make this free to them. And then we have an external evaluator to, be able to analyze what's the results of the students who get these kinds of interventions on completion. And we know that 11% of first gen, even before this crisis, were graduating, and that's probably going to really impact that number now.
Yeah,
so
interesting. Had a very similar conversation in North Texas yesterday with the community college district, and they're involved in the Promise program where they're.
Is it with? Yeah, we the Lifebound folks have trained all their coaches. So we work closely with the whole. Their 7 schools becoming one, and.
Well, so they've had a 52% fallout from last year's cohort, and their feeling is, because a large part of that fallout is because they were putting the wrong kid in the wrong program.
Right. Well, Celeste, you should share, if you can, share the information on Craig Satterfield, because I'm sure they would appreciate having each other's perspectives on that. So. Well, good deal. Here's a question. The use of this resource for underserved and first-gen HBCU students could be impactful. Totally, Tonjeli, I hope I'm saying your name right, but we really believe that we need to track and measure models that can go out to all of the different underrepresented institutions. And until those students and their faculty get training and what we call the hidden curriculum, we can't expect that those students are going to graduate at the same rates as students who have all kinds of resources, who are from really much more wealthy zip codes. So yeah, so we're really looking at how do you aggregate the solutions, both for the students but also for the faculty, so that they have the same training that Union College or NYU or private schools anywhere are able to give their staff and their students. So,
Brilliant.
well, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody. And oh, JC wants to say something. JC, jump in. Still got a little bit of time.
Hope I didn't let you down, JC.
No, loved the presentation. Loved it. I guess just on a side note, I really admire what you guys are doing, and this is somewhat of a bottom-up approach, and it is such a shame that there is not a better top-down approach at the board levels, because my experience has been on the corporate boards, there's very little diversity there. It is a good old boy network, and most of the directors are really not qualified to for the jobs they're doing on many of the committees, like audit committee, compensation. So it would really be wonderful at some point if this was a top-down approach as well for board selection.
Boy, I love that idea. I just got to say that, JC, because that's one of the big things we're trying to do is get far more representation into those areas where it's just been, a lot of them are like clubs of privilege.
Yeah.
It's beyond that. I actually believe I'm dealing with one now that there is no board member there that is really qualified to be in the position they're in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I go back to what I said, JC, and I think, is there a lot of risk and a lot of problem and a lot of pain right now? Yes. And I think we're at an inflection point in our history where there is an opportunity to change more things for the better than we've had an opportunity to do in a lifetime. And I think we need to stay alert to the opportunity. We need to stay focused on what we see as possible, and we need to go after it with more tenacity than we've ever had to muster before.
I totally agree.
I'm your biggest fan.
Likewise.
Well, we appreciate you making the time for this today, John, and also pivoting because, you know, we were all planning to see each other in person, and we hope there's a vaccine ASAP and that we'll all be seeing each other in person in June of 2021, and that everybody
Amen to
will
that.
be coming to Denver. And I think the silver lining for us is that we've had so many people attend these sessions, and then we've had, you know, I think we've had 24 sessions so far, and, you know, almost 700 people looking at the YouTube sessions. So
cool.
There's a lot of people who can't watch it for managing their kids and different things, but they can do that. And a lot of our first gen students are going to be also learning from each of you as well, because they're role models that they see themselves in what you're doing, and how they can learn about themselves, but also see people who are like them as well. So very much appreciate it, and thanks to all of you. So we'll give you a virtual round of applause. And I'm Celeste and I, maybe we can go ahead and schedule a call with you and figure out how we can make this a part of tracking and measuring what's happening at those HBCUs, MSIs, and HSIs.
Okay, my phone number is right there on the screen.
Get that going. All right. We'll get
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a great day.
See ya.
Take care. Bye-bye.